Now then, how you doing? I hope you're well. First off, apologies for my voice, which is a bit on the croaky side, thanks to a rather virulent bug that I've had since the new year. You know what they say though, the show must go on, and in this video I'm going to be tackling the challenge of a church interior in a loose and hopefully spontaneous way. And when I say loose, well, don't expect much in the way of precision here. It's all about having a little bit of fun with it. If, like me, you do a lot of travelling, then it's highly likely that you've walked into a fair number of churches. To the watercolour painter, interiors present us with a series of unique challenges. They're all different, but they all have one thing in common, one thing that is crucial to the process of watercolour, particularly when it comes to architecture, and that's light. St. Paul's Cathedral in central London, a magnificent example of Baroque architecture dating back to 1710, designed by Sir Christopher Wren, one of the most highly acclaimed architects of his time. I want to begin by offering some tips on where to start with such visual complexity and showing how a loose, carefree approach can be quite liberating. Or to quote the title of a popular book from the 1980s, feel the fear and do it anyway. Where better to dive in and tackle that fear than the section known as the choir? Loose and carefree might seem scary at first, but let's just start by reminding ourselves what's involved here. That all we're doing essentially is applying paint to a piece of paper. It's important to know that I haven't pre-planned this and I haven't painted it before. I've mixed myself some cadmium yellow and I'm placing it where I think some of the warm light is most likely to be. I've switched to French ultramarine now, working outwards from those lights and the initial yellow brush marks, but also encouraging the two colours to bleed together and create soft, smooth transitions. I'm using the ultramarine to draw out some of the most dominant shapes I can see in the scene, such as the window in the background and the line of the stalls and the floor. The ceiling is also curved, so I want to try and convey that too. Remember, the object of the exercise is to keep things as loose and spontaneous as possible. So absolute accuracy isn't a priority. I'm more interested in creating an impression of the scene than it being too literal. The third colour I've introduced is burnt umber. One of the features of the choir is its lovely dark wooden panels, and burnt umber is ideal for that. Again though, I want to stress just how loose and ambiguous many of these brushstrokes are. The result is deliberately imprecise, and I'm still encouraging the colours to bleed together, relying on narrow gaps between them to enable me to maintain some hard edges. Loose and ambiguous it may be, but the scene still has to retain at least some degree of integrity. Otherwise, the result would be too abstract and difficult to understand. Having said all that, there is a strong argument for leaving some elements underworked and wide open to interpretation. With the first phase now complete and dried off, it's time to throw some dark, intense tones at it. This is a rich mix made from French ultramarine and burnt umber, with the emphasis leaning towards the burnt umber. Well, that's because when I soften parts of it off with a damp brush, as you see me doing here, I want the result to be warm rather than cool. Well, clearly in any watercolour painting scenario, brush marks as strong and dark as this are always going to make quite an impact, so I need to take some care over where I apply them. Having gone to the trouble of creating a nice light first wash, it would be a shame to then obliterate it completely and overwork it. The key to this, if there is one, is to take hints from that first wash and to have the two layers appear to support and interact with each other, not compete with each other. And one way in which I can make that happen is to be constantly looking out for areas where I can soften the darker tone off. In effect, this helps to build visual links between the two washes. I'm fascinated by the series of curves that not only define the shape of the ceiling but also go some way towards creating the illusion of depth, with the arches and curves receding away from us, getting smaller and closer together as they do so. In some respects, this is a small detail, but it is a detail that I have identified and prioritised and decided should be included at all cost. In watercolour, we have choices to make. That's a given, of course, but the precise nature of those choices will inevitably shape our own personal interpretation of it. It's a loose, slightly ill-disciplined, sketch-like interpretation of the choir in St. Paul's Cathedral. It could use some finesse, but then again, finesse was never the objective. Church interiors can be somewhat overwhelming in the amount of detail that they present to us. A reasonable reaction to that might be to dismiss any idea of even attempting a watercolour painting at all, probably accompanied by remarks along the lines of not even knowing where to start. Well, my advice would be to put all that aside, feel the fear and do it anyway. Step out of your comfort zone and throw caution to the wind. My advice would be to always bear in mind the fact that in watercolour we work from light to dark, so resist the temptation to dive in there too quickly with any really dark, heavy tones. Look at your scene and identify where the lightest tones are and make that your starting point. And once those first brushstrokes have been committed to paper, try to keep the ball rolling by adding a second and third colour while things are still damp, and actively encourage them to bleed together in random and hopefully exciting and unpredictable ways. But here's the most important piece of advice: have a bit of fun with it. If the subject demands it and you don't want to take any chances, Draw it out first in pencil, but keep it light and try to keep it as simple as possible. And it goes without saying that a pencil drawing can be modified and corrected if necessary. Consider laying down a loose underwash first, one that establishes an impression of the scene, concentrating on broad strokes, one that establishes the main sources of light within the scene. Remember, if it's an interior, then you are likely to have multiple light sources, although there is still likely to be some natural light entering and impacting upon the subject also. Once you've established that loose underwash, build things up gradually. Don't be in too much of a hurry to get to the darkest tones. Mid-tones and natural greys will do just as good a job in sculpting the subject and giving it three-dimensionality. When you're ready, hit it with the darkest tones, but apply them with care. In watercolour, if we want something to look particularly light and bright, then we make that happen by placing extremely dark tones next to it. In other words, tone is relative. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, then please do hit the like button. It really does make a difference. And if you'd like to see more, why not become a studio member of my YouTube channel? With that, you'll get instant access to the full-length, non-time-lapsed version of the demonstration from which this has just been a very small extract, along with a bursting back catalogue of full-length demonstrations and tutorials, all for you to enjoy at any time. But to subscribe, just hit that join button. There are other sign-up options available, such as my online tuition service. If you want to take a look at those, you'll find full details in the video description below. And that's it from me for now. Until next time, take care.